The largest living thing ever measured was not a dinosaur or a blue whale, but was a Victorian tree. It's in the Guinness Book of Records as the tallest tree ever measured. We no longer have any of those giant trees. There were several of them which would have topped the highest in California. People 100, 150 years ago perhaps knew no better, but we do know better now. In this year of International Year of Biodiversity, let's just think about our forests. The potoroo, the long-footed potoroo, was first described to science in 1980, just 30 years ago. We have discovered new species of trees in East Gippsland just in the past 20 years. We've just, in the past few weeks, found new species of crayfish in East Gippsland. The temperate forests of Victoria are the most diverse temperate forests on earth. They are world class, and yet we continue to log them. Now, we have, I was representing people who were protesting at Brown Mountain 20 years ago, and just before the 1990 federal election, we were promised a process. There would be an investigation into whether there were prudent and feasible alternatives into logging national estate forests in East Gippsland. And on that basis, the protests ended, the federal election was held, there was an investigation, and at the end of that process, there were prudent and feasible alternatives found. But those areas were logged anyway. And just before the last state election in 2006, Labor promised to save significant old growth forests. But the 40,000 hectares that they saved, only about a quarter of them were real old growth forests, and there were significant areas, including Brown Mountain, excluded from that which was saved. And then we found that Vic Forests was, we already knew, but we had to go to court to show that Vic Forests was logging illegally on behalf of the Victorian government. It wasn't complying with the law, and community groups had to take it to court to deal with it. We have massive plantation estate, both in hardwood and softwood, in the west of the state. They're so needing labour that they're actually importing jobs from overseas. They're importing labour from overseas. Meanwhile, there's very few jobs in the east of the state where the logging industry in our native forests is just persisting. When I was living in Gippsland in Bairnsdale 30 years ago and acting in those days for the Australian Timber Workers Union, as it was called, there were about 40 mills in Gippsland. There's now about half a dozen. The industry is on its way out. It's only been propped up because it doesn't have the same costs as the plantation industry. Buying the land, planting the trees, building the roads, paying rates, all of the things that a normal business would have to do. Instead, we're selling off this forest estate for a song. We know that these are the most carbon-dense forests on earth. We know that the logging of our forests costs as much greenhouse as probably all the cars in Melbourne, or certainly close to that. We know that every time we log a hectare of forest, it takes 150 years for the water yield to return to what it was before we logged it, because the new trees transpire so much water. We know that just the Melbourne catchments, let alone the catchments elsewhere in the state, it's costing, on the lowest figures that we've seen, which is a government figure, 15 gigalitres a year. And we know that the water that we're losing is more valuable than the wood chips that we're selling. It makes no sense to continue with this industry. We should be immediately transitioning from the east of the state to the west of the state, using our huge plantation resource. And in the east of the state, we should be having a world-class tourism destination, extending our Alpine National Park and the Forests National Parks in East Gippsland to the one big national park with great trails that will be a draw card from around the world for people to come to. More jobs, both in the east of the state and the west of the state, and a wonderful resource saved.